Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. As Poland's presidential campaign picks up steam, the country's largest opposition party is accusing the government of conducting coup d'etat. More on that in a moment, but first, the latest headlines. The first delivery of French-made Mirage fighter jets has arrived in Ukraine. Slovakia and Hungary each accuse Ukraine of planning a coup d'etat. And Croatians boycott retail shops over a huge hike in prices. The main Polish opposition party, Law and Justice, says the democratically elected government, led by Donald Tusk, has conducted a coup d'etat. A judge from the Constitutional Tribunal, with close ties to the former ruling party, has filed for a criminal investigation into the alleged forceful systemic change. The Polish authorities and legal experts dismissed the claim as ridiculous, while a right-wing media attempt to portray the situation as the end of democracy in Poland. Kazimierz Łysiak reports.
Has there been a coup d'etat in Poland? The main judge of the Constitutional Tribunal is convinced the answer is yes.
I filed for the possibility of a crime having been committed by the Prime Minister, ministers, parliament speakers and other members of the ruling coalition. The crime we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is a coup d'etat.
Święczkowski has failed to provide any details or proof of an actual coup taking place. So is this claim based in reality? I asked a law professor from the University of Warsaw.
Of course, there is no coup in Poland, and any kind of claims which are currently made by the head of the Constitutional Tribunal are without any legal basis. What appears to me is that Mr. Święczkowski, who is the head of the Constitutional Tribunal, is actually showing us his political manifesto.
The whole case becomes even clearer when we examine who exactly Bogdan Święczkowski is. Him and several other former Law and Justice MPs were appointed judges of the Constitutional Court by the previous government as part of the judicial changes which sparked massive protests on the streets of Polish cities. Critics said these changes were aimed at subjugating the judicial system in Poland, compromising the Constitutional Tribunal, the Supreme Court and the entire judiciary. The European Union also said these changes were undemocratic and fined Poland millions of euro for failing to comply with European legal standards. That's why the current centre-liberal government doesn't seem too concerned with the claims made by the compromised right-wing judge. Prime Minister Donald Tusk commented on the matter while playing a round of table tennis.
Come on, we've got serious matters to take care of here. We'll deal with that later.
Claims from the conservative opposition in Poland that democracy is over are also nothing new. This has been one of the main narratives of the Law and Justice Party since it lost the elections in late 2023, even though the party did recognize its results. Right-wing media, in the meantime, are trying to fuel their viewers' anxiety over the alleged coup.
We've actually received several calls from elderly people who said they were looking out the windows afraid there would be tanks on the streets.
The political debate in Poland is heating up as the country is approaching the presidential election in May. The Conservative Party has also intensified its revolutionary rhetoric since several of its prominent members have been under investigation for a series of alleged malpractices committed during their term of office. These include former Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, former Justice and Defense Ministers Zbigniew Ziobro and Mariusz Błaszczak, as well as former heads of government agencies.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski met with the NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte in Brussels on Thursday. The two officials discussed Poland's approach to defense.
Today, Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski met with NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, who commended Poland's investment in defense, describing Poland as a model NATO member. The conversation focused on preparations for the NATO summit and the priorities of the Polish presidency of the Council of the European Union in the field of defense.
Ukrainian enlistment officers have been attacked 4 times within a week. According to the head of Ukraine's police, Russia is behind recruiting suicide bombers to conduct these acts of terror. Our correspondent Os Katerzy is in Kyiv with more details. Good evening, Os. So what more can you tell us about these attacks?
Well, the reports coming out today was that a suspect was killed in this attack that happened on Wednesday, approached this military enlistment office with a parcel and it exploded, wounding 4 people, and the suspect was killed. Now, the SBU have put out a warning, as it were, warning citizens of Ukraine that if someone asks them to deliver something to a military office, military base, military enlistment office, to inform Ukraine's security services of this, using social media, Telegram, to inform of this, and to not do this, as they are warning that Russia may be trying to recruit unwitting bombers to attack these kinds of military enlistment offices. Now, this is the 4th attack in a week. The first one happening on February the 1st in Rivne, and another one happened on the same day in the Piryatim region, city of Piryatim, sorry. And the third happened in Pavlohrad on February 2nd, with the 5th happening on Wednesday in Kamianets-Podilsky in western Ukraine. So we're looking at a spate of attacks which the Ukrainian authorities believe is linked to Russian intelligence services.
That was Os Katerzy reporting from Kyiv. Thank you very much, Os, and of course stay safe. The first Mirage 2000 fighter jets arrived in Ukraine today. The aircraft, donated by Paris, will support Kyiv's Air Force, which already operates other Western fighters such as F-16s to protect the country against Russian assaults. As relations between Paris and Moscow deteriorate, the Kremlin has decided to withdraw the press accreditation for French newspaper Le Monde's correspondent in Moscow. Marek Steele reports.
Mirage jets can be used for intercepting missiles, countering drones, and for ground strikes. Paris has now donated the first of these jets to Kyiv.
June 6, 2024, Emmanuel Macron announced the delivery of French Mirage 2000s to Ukraine. The first of them arrived in Ukraine today. With Ukrainian pilots trained for several months in France on board, they will now help defend the skies over Ukraine.
The Mirage is the oldest aircraft in service with the French Air Force, but it's far from obsolete. France could donate 6 such jets to Ukraine, according to French media reports, but this has not been confirmed either by Paris or Kyiv.
I won't tell you the number, I have no right to do so, but the dates are those we agreed on with President Macron. Yes, Mirage jets arrived, but to be honest, we expected additional F-16 jets and Mirage jets to arrive.
The French fighter can carry long-range missiles and guided bombs. France and the UK have supplied Kyiv with Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of 250 kilometers.
The French delivery of the Mirage 2000s are not going to be the game changer that so many people wanted to apply to other weapon systems. What they're going to do, though, is make very certain that the Ukrainian Defense Forces are going to be in a position to inflict offensive damage onto the Russian enemy, and that's something that will allow us to get some breathing room and be able to force the Russians into a just peace.
With France providing weapons to Kyiv since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, relations between Paris and Moscow have not been too warm. For the first time since the 1950s, French daily Le Monde will not have a correspondent in Moscow. The Kremlin has cancelled accreditation for Benjamin Quenel, who has worked as a journalist in Moscow for the past 20 years. Now he is prohibited from exercising his profession.
This revocation of our right to practice our profession is unprecedented. Even in the most tense moments of the Cold War, Le Monde had continued its work in Moscow and elsewhere.
The spokesperson of the Russian Foreign Ministry has admitted that Moscow refused to extend the journalist accreditation in retaliation to France declining to grant visas to journalists from the Komsomolskaya Pravda tabloid. The French Foreign Ministry said the names put forward by Moscow were not those of journalists, but of agents of Russian intelligence. Since 2022, Russia has tightened its grip over the media. It has forced the closure of the last independent outlets and labeled many journalists and activists as foreign agents. Those who remained faced a tough job of avoiding long prison sentences for publishing what the Kremlin calls fake news about the Russian military.
The fake news law can also be used against foreign journalists. What proves that this kind of work is very risky, we can see from the story of Evan Gershkovich.
The arrest of Wall Street Journal correspondent Ivan Gershkovich in 2023 prompted many more journalists to leave. Gershkovich, accused by the Kremlin of spying and jailed for nearly a year and a half, was released in a prisoner swap last summer.
Slovakia and Hungary claim that Ukraine is meddling in their internal affairs, suggesting an underground political coup is underway. But the evidence is rather thin, and those spoken to by TVP World say the allegations are baseless and playing into Russia's hands. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Demon, has more.
In Hungary, allegations of a political smear campaign.
Nothing is expensive for those who can afford it. At today's meeting of the National Security Committee, we were informed by the secret services that according to the information they have obtained, the Ukrainian state is launching a smear campaign against the Hungarian Prime Minister.
The country's ruling Fidesz party faction suggesting that Hungarian intelligence services have discovered a Ukrainian effort to tarnish Prime Minister Viktor Orban's reputation. Similar accusations from Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico that Ukraine is planning a political coup.
Just listening to these claims, you don't know if you are supposed to laugh or what's wrong about him, because they are completely baseless.
Some say this is straight out of Putin's playbook.
It is in the best Putin interest to divide and rule. It is obviously the weak Europe, the divided Europe, is something which makes him stronger ultimately.
Mass protests have gathered in recent weeks on the streets of Slovakia, with Prime Minister Fico talking about a so-called Maidan scenario, attempting to destabilize the country, referring to Ukraine's pro-European revolution of more than a decade ago. Ukraine's military intelligence agency strongly denies any accusations of illegal activity in Slovakia.
It's always dangerous when you have a European leader who spreads these hoaxes, who works with fear-mongering, who works with misinformation, disinformation, because it might serve as a domino effect also to other countries.
What is happening in Slovakia is that a growing part of the Slovak population is becoming really unhappy and upset with what Fico and his, let's say, regime is doing to the country.
Just last month, Prime Ministers Fico and Orban met in Bratislava to discuss energy security after Kyiv refused to extend its gas delivery deal with Moscow, spelling the end of Russian gas pouring into Europe. And at the end of last year, these pictures emerged out of Moscow, Fico also standing side by side with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
These lies about a coup are something for me which is showing the weakness of the government and kind of the fear-mongering is trying to create, maybe, inspired by what he was told and his people on the visits to Moscow. Who knows?
Two Central European countries getting cozy with Russia as the war in Ukraine heads into its fourth year.
Skyrocketing prices in Croatia have led to a consumer boycott of stores all over the country, with retail turnover dropping over 40% in recent weeks. The impact of these continued boycotts is being felt nationwide and gaining traction even in neighboring countries. Sonia Gatabiszczyn has more.
recipe, an over 30% rise in food prices over the past 3 years. The result? Empty stores like these in Croatia. Citizens are now taking a stand, engaging in nationwide boycotts.
I am not shopping at all. I support the boycott.
Do you think it will bring any results?
I truly hope so, because our citizens are fed up.
Bread went from 70 cents to €1.60, so the price of bread has gone up 150%.
We're from Germany, and we always thought money went a lot further here, but we ended up spending so much. A lot. It's even more expensive than in Germany, I have to say.
Croatians' determination in the last weeks has translated into losses of tens of millions of euros for the retailers. According to data released in early February, retail turnover in the country dropped 44%. In January 2025, Croatia reported an annual inflation rate of 5%, the highest in the Eurozone. The surge in prices, partly a legacy of the COVID-19 pandemic and the introduction of the euro in 2023, prompted the consumer association Hello Inspector to intervene and encourage buyers to work together to curb the rampant price hikes.
Consumers have clearly shown their dissatisfaction and that the situation is unsustainable when it comes to the most important consumer sector, which is food, trade, services and everything else related to it.
Experts say consumer protection and shoppers' refusal to buy products at increasingly high prices were key all along.
If there is no consumer protection, then profit is the king.
The shared dissatisfaction with the prices united the region, and the boycotts have now spread to nearby countries, including Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, North Macedonia and Serbia.
The main similarity is that actually they are copying Croatia, and the reason for the copying is the same. They didn't realize that consumers have such a power, that they can say something.
The boycotts in Croatia and the neighboring nations will continue until further notice. Boycotters want the retailers to demonstrate social responsibility and adjust prices to match the citizens' economic conditions.
The threat of US tariffs looms over Europe. Is Poland prepared to counter them? And how can this burden affect Polish defense preparedness? Here to talk about that and more is Polish MP Aleksandra Uznańska-Wiśniewska, a member of the Parliamentary National Defense Committee. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you so much, sir, for having me.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. So how do you think the EU should respond to possible US tariffs?
So I believe that we should show a cautious, firm and clear stance to the US, that any trade war would actually be absurd and preposterous, also from the American interest point of view, as we are obviously strategic allies to each other, not only on the economic front, but as you have mentioned, on the front of defense, where the Americans are such critical and pivotal allies, not only for the entirety of Europe, but for Poland in particular. But we have to obviously analyze and continue to monitor the situation. As of now, I'm happy to confirm that no tariffs have been imposed on the EU quite yet. But if Poland was to respond, we have to respond as a part of the EU. So perhaps we can leverage our position of being a particularly strong ally of the United States in Poland, given the defense spending as well. But obviously having our economic interest of the EU here as our key interest at stake. Yeah.
But precisely won't it lead to a sort of a conflict of interest? On one side, we're supporting the EU as being part of the EU, and then again, we are being part of the NATO alliance, which relies basically on the US.
One of the priorities of the EU, of the Polish presidency in the EU, which obviously has started already, is that to actually align the interests of NATO with the interests of the EU. And I think Poland, as one of the strongest NATO partners when it comes to defense spending, so we're currently spending 4.7%, which is actually the highest amongst all NATO allies. So we are actually putting our money where our mouth is, sort of metaphorically. We are in a particularly good position to be a bridge, to the US when it comes to the advocating for Europe's economic interest. And, as of recently, we also on the level of the Defense Committee in the Parliament, when we're analyzing the spending that is currently being made, we see so much of the American investments that the Polish state is currently doing, So, for instance, from the F-35s to HIMARS, to the Apache helicopters, to the Abrams tanks. So these all actually display a very deep partnership between Poles and the Americans, with the close to 11,000 American troops actually stationed in Poland, so we have to aim to ensure that no trade war actually happens, and that whatever economic interest and the economic sort of slight divergence might happen, this actually does not undermine our transatlantic strategic unity, that lies in solidarity, that lies in values, and not only purely in transactionality, or economic negotiation. We ought to keep these two, economic negotiation and the defense unity, as separate, I believe, yeah.
Now, talking about Polish army, it undergoes quite a rapid modernization in the last few years. Now, could you outline the key priorities of it?
Correct. So, due to the tragedy of the war, of the Ukraine-Russia war, actually Russia-West war at present, on the level of values at least, we are learning so much from the Ukraine front, from the changing character of war. And that has led us to a series of changing priorities, One of them is really focusing on the air defense capabilities, on very, very good air defense systems, One thing that we observe, from the Ukraine front is that, there are missile attacks happening basically daily. So the war has moved, from the front line to that which can span the sky all over the country, also including the drone warfare. So we have to have a very good, sort of anti-drone warfare capabilities, but also with the changing character of war, we also see increased hybrid attacks, cybersecurity attacks, and this is very new. War in space, sort of the upcoming new NATO domain, which until now we had not sufficiently sophisticated and nuanced understanding of, So we are investing in all these new domains heavily, but also focusing on the Polish domestic industry to ensure actually that all the military spending that is being made translates into local technologies, translates into local R&D, local jobs as well, and that we can actually justify, to the Poles, that these investments being made strengthen Polish technology, science, and economy in long term as well.
The question is whether is it meant only to strengthen the position of Poland or the whole NATO's eastern flank?
So Poland is the leader of NATO's eastern flank. So we are actually NATO's eastern flank, right? And we are so happy to see, the new NATO members, Sweden joining us. It's all great, But we have to take the position of the responsible NATO ally in the east. And also, I think. This perhaps might be, slightly daring to say, but I hope that, when we think of the future of the Polish army, we will at some point stop thinking of if the allies are always going to come to respond, which of course, looking at the Article 5 of NATO, they ought to, but also looking at, okay, how do we build our Polish power, superpower one day, hopefully, so that we are as independent as possible.
You touched upon the topic of hybrid warfare, and to counter the alleged hybrid Russian operations in the Baltic Sea, there's this Baltic Sentry initiative. So what capabilities or resources do you believe the Baltic Sentry should have?
So very strong intelligence sharing, so we need to learn how do we actually communicate between one another, how do we analyze the hybrid threats that are currently happening on the Baltic Sea. It's been such fantastic news, to hear about the establishment of such initiative, and since then I had actually filed a direct inquiry to the Ministry of Defense, available online, on the parliamentary website, where you can see that, I'm actually advocating, to use this opportunity of creation of the Baltic Sentry Force to actually modernize the entire naval force of Poland, but also we have to focus on the very strong interoperability of our armies, and given the fact that we have this sort of geographical depth in Poland, we can actually use our land, to station allied forces in the future on the level of the Baltic Sea, of course, yeah.
Right. In 2024, Poland announced the East Shield program. How is it progressing?
It is progressing well, but I have to say that, from the perspective of an MP serving in the National Defense Committee, but also one of the humanitarian background, where I've spent years of my life serving in foreign missions abroad, I do see as well that one of the things which particularly we've been very well positioned, to respond to the hybrid attacks directed at us by Moscow and Minsk. So when it comes to the using as unfortunate as it is, and as heartbreaking as it is, they've been using people on the move, to try to force illegal crossings of our borders, and we're currently actually proceeding a couple of legislations at the level of the parliament, and which are extremely difficult to address, because we have to balance out the security as well as solidarity, humanity, human rights, and we have to be extremely careful, to ensure that we ensure that our primary responsibility to the security of our citizens, which until now actually have worked, so the illegal crossings have dropped, but actually that we ensure, this is all centers on Geneva Conventions on human rights, and that this discussion is actually happening in the parliament. In the upcoming weeks, we will see this legislation being debated, and I hope to be a strong human rights voice and security voice as well in this discussion.
I'd like to get back to the Baltic Century for a little while. In order to secure the safety of the Baltic Sea, Poland would definitely need a strong navy. Does it have one?
So we do have a strong navy, however, not sufficiently strong given the task, I think that what we can actually bring, to the Baltic Century as well, and to the entirety of NATO at present, is the sense of urgency, is a sense of determination, which we see, with our Ukrainian counterparts, waking up to pools of blood of their beloved ones, currently for, almost 2-3 years running, And given that, we have a completely different approach to the Baltic Century than the states that are slightly, further away from the very front line, that have not been attacked so much with the cyber attacks or hybrid attacks. Poland is one of the top 3 countries in the world, given the data from our Ministry of Digitalization when it comes to actually cyber threats, and cyber attacks daily. So the war in cyber is happening daily all the time. It's just that we cannot see that really, It's because our cyber defense is actually working, but the sense of determination, something that we can really bring to the Baltic Century. And I hope that our naval force will step up to the challenge,
And there are things we just simply fail to see sometimes. How important is it for Poland to boost its space defense?
I think it's critically important, and this is something that we have been undermining for a while now. Space along cyber is one of the new NATO domains, in fact. And just today we had a hearing in the Committee of Defense, regarding space industry, with representatives from the Ministry of Development and Technology, the representatives from the Polish Space Agency, that were briefing us actually about the developments, and especially about the preparations of the Polish mission to the International Space Station, with the Polish astronaut. Also happens to be my husband, but I have to say that according to me, we have to start to build this understanding that actually space applications and space technologies are mostly dual use, so basically all technologies that we're developing, the Earth observations, the surveillance, the analysis, we can use, to the military advantage as well. And either Poland will be able to invest in these technologies now, using the big military defense investments that we're currently doing, or we will have to be technology dependent on foreign powers in the future, and especially I think given what the US, our strategic ally, has been saying with the new Donald Trump administration, has been saying regarding the space industry, with mentioning even Mars, in their inauguration speech, ought to, trigger us and our European allies to think, about investing in space industry a lot more. And I have to say that, a couple of months back, I have been together with the committee members visiting the Ariane systems, so the Ariane factories in France, in Paris. And I have to say that I have been quite disquieted, given the fact that our European launch capabilities, are so impoverished, when we compare it to the American ones, to the Russian ones, to the Korean ones, to the Iran ones, we have all these states that have been sending, not only missiles, but sending also, crew space flights, manned space flights, human space flights, up and down,
it's all very costly, as you know perfectly well. As you said, your husband is leaving for the ISS this spring, and he's taking something very particular with him to the orbit. Namely traditional Polish dish, pierogi. Why so?
So, the astronauts on the ISS are coming from different parts of the world, from different cultures, just on the mission Sławosz, so of our Polish astronauts. And there is an American commander, Peggy Whitson, and there is a Hungarian astronaut, an astronaut from India, and they're all taking some traditional sort of cuisine, which obviously has to be adjusted, to that of space, and Sławosz has been working together with Lio Foods, so with the Polish company, for a while now on a particular technology, that would allow him to recreate Polish pierogi using water, of course, in space, and as a small symbol of Poland. But he's taking also a flag originally used by General Mirosław Hermaszewski, so the first Polish cosmonaut at the time, cosmonaut of the USSR, astronauts sort of in the Western democratic world, and a couple of symbols of Chopin, of Wisława Szymborska, and as a Pole, we all hope, I hope we can all, follow the mission, and we can all be moved and proud, and also translate the results of the mission in the future into tangible investments in our science, technology, and defense.
Hopefully so. Polish MP Aleksandra Uznańska-Wiśniewska was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for watching. That would be all for now. On the Record with Adam Jasser is coming up next.